Jason Karaian is a senior European correspondent for Quartz. He recently wrote an article about the impact of Russia's sanctions on European consumer prices, such as cheese. Jason started our chat by walking me through the cause and effect relationship between Russia's food ban and European food prices.
One of the implications of Russia's embargo on food imports from Europe is that Europe is left with lots of unsold food, of Polish fruits, of Finnish cheeses. And what that means is that they need to find a market for that. And so all of the fruit, the cheese, the meat that once went to Russia now needs to be sold. And often what producers will do is that they'll need to dump it closer to home, basically. And what that means is that prices will fall. And so in certain categories, like, for example, Finnish cheese, we see that the prices there are falling very rapidly. And now food is an important component of people's shopping baskets, of course, but it's not a huge component. So at the margin, this makes prices rise a bit less fast than they would normally. It's important to say that the Eurozone has low inflation. It's not yet into deflation. And so what this Russian embargo does is at the margin, it pushes the Eurozone a bit closer to deflation. So in a way, the second order effect of the embargo is that deflation becomes a much more real possibility for the Eurozone.
Let me shift gears very slightly and talk about, you also wrote about what President Putin could do in other forms of retaliation outside of this.
So I think the probabilities are definitely that sanctions could potentially get worse before they get better, before they're removed. And we're hearing reports now that there could be something around maybe Russia banning something to do with the auto industry, auto parts, cars, something like that. They import a huge amount of European cars, and so that could definitely hurt countries like Germany, especially. And so that could be something that's coming up next. There's a number of Russia imports a lot of goods, and so there are a number of ways that it can hurt its trading partners there. But the real thing that it needs to think about is not hurting itself as much as it hurts who it's intending to harm. In many cases, being
wasn't this exactly what Europe was worried about when we first began the discussion of sanctions, and Europe was a bit skittish about doing anything because they had also the most to lose?
Well, they do have the most to lose, definitely. And this is why we've seen Europe and Germany in particular be the biggest diplomatic force trying to get the sides to talk to each other. Places like the US, Canada, Norway, Australia, who are the other countries who have been hit by this, for example, this food embargo, will not feel the pinch as bad as the European Union will, particularly Eastern Europe and especially Germany also. And so that's why you see, in particular, Chancellor Merkel seems to be trying the hardest to get Russia, Ukraine, the US, and really the international community to talk to each other and try and solve this through talks rather than through sanctions.
So this is the result of the buildup of pressure from the last few months. Give me something positive that could come out of this. Is there a possibility that all these sanctions from both sides could go away if there's a diplomatic settlement, or do you think we're in it for the long run?
Yes, well, I think, again, I would say that the probability is that the sanctions could get worse before they get better. But next week, for example, there will be very high-level meetings between Mr. Putin, Mr. Poroshenko, Chancellor Merkel, and others. There seems to be a step up of the efforts to talk with one another. And so I think particularly next week we'll see some news out of the meetings between presidents, and particularly between Russia and Ukraine. Obviously, these are the two main actors here. But, of course, everything depends on the facts on the ground in eastern Ukraine. And the fighting there is still very fierce. And it's hard to see until that stops. It's hard to see that the sanctions will get anything but harsher.
Jason Karaian, thank you, senior European correspondent at Quartz from London.